Dead America, Tales from Las Vegas, The High Roller by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Just before midnight, a few miles off the Strip, the streets of Las Vegas were quieter than usual. The normal flow of traffic had thinned to a trickle, and the sidewalks that typically teemed with tourists were nearly empty. Sammy Torrino sat in the back of a stretched limo, fixing himself a drink from the bar, affixed to the seat just to his right. He pulled 2 ice cubes from the built-in cooler, dropping them into a crystal tumbler. The amber liquid that followed was 30-year-old scotch, the kind that cost more per bottle than most people made in a month. Sammy, or Lucky Sam as his friends often referred to him, muttered curses under his breath as the vehicle hit a pothole. The jolt nearly caused him to spill some of his precious alcohol onto his custom-tailored suit. "Hey, watch it up there. A bottle of this stuff costs more than you make in a month," Sammy called out to the driver. The driver didn't respond, instead slowing down for the remainder of their drive. Whether it was out of caution or spite, Sammy couldn't tell. He shook it off, checking his handmade Italian suit for any stains before sitting back in the leather seat. Through the tinted glass of the limo, he tried to get his bearings as familiar landmarks passed by. He had been coming to the Strip for nearly 5 decades now. Las Vegas, born and raised. His father had built half the buildings just off the main boulevard during the city's boom years, and when he came of age, Sammy took over the family business. The transition had been smooth, almost predetermined. Sammy ran the business just like his father did, with an iron fist and a calculator where his heart should be. Money came first, always. Employees were expenses, relationships were transactions, and loyalty could be bought for the right price. In fact, the only meaningful difference between Sammy and his father was their preferred casino game. While his dad had favored roulette with its spinning wheel of chance, Sammy was all in on blackjack, where skill could shift the odds. As they continued down the street, Sammy's phone rang. The custom ringtone, cash register sounds, echoed through the limo's interior. "Yeah, this is Sammy," Sammy answered, not bothering with pleasantries. "Sir, this is Mr. Landry. I'm sorry to bother you, but..." The voice on the other end began. Mr. Landry was the head guard of the ultra-exclusive Lake Las Vegas community where Sammy resided. Despite not owning the development itself, Sammy had bankrolled the additional security measures, gates, cameras, armed patrols. It meant they answered to him first, the actual owners second. "It's all right, Landry. I still have a few minutes before I'm at the Silver Moon." "What is it?" Sammy asked. "Well, sir, we just had 3 more guards call out for the morning shift. We are approaching critical staffing levels," Mr. Landry reported. "Yeah, no shit, Landry. That's why instead of having you protect me, I had to call a favor into the agency to get a few rentals for tonight," Sammy said. "I do apologize, sir, but I talked to Kennedy over at the agency, and they assured me that they have their best available men on you," Mr. Landry said. "Well, they better. I don't exactly make a lot of friends in my line of work," Sammy replied. That was an understatement. Sammy's business practices had left a trail of bankrupted competitors, evicted tenants, and former partners who'd learned too late that verbal agreements meant nothing to him. "Kennedy personally vouched for each of them, sir," Mr. Landry assured him. "Yeah, fine, whatever. I should be back by dawn, and I expect you to have the staffing issues sorted out by then," Sammy said. "Yes, sir. I will figure out a way to make it work," Mr. Landry replied. "Good man," Sammy said. He felt the limo beginning to slow down, prompting him to look out the window. The familiar neon glow of the Strip came into view, its lights cutting through the darkness like an electric oasis. His destination was just a few blocks ahead, the Silver Moon Casino. "I'm here. We'll talk later," Sammy said into the phone. "Good luck at the table, sir," Mr. Landry replied. Sammy didn't respond, clicking his phone off before downing the rest of his drink in one smooth motion. The scotch burned pleasantly down his throat as the limo pulled up to the front of the casino. Through the window, he saw 3 men getting out of a black SUV just ahead of them. Within moments, they were parked at the VIP entrance, and the driver hurried around to open the door for him. "We're here, Mr. Torrino," the driver announced. Sammy got out of the limo, not bothering to look at the driver as he spoke down to him. The man was just another employee, another expense on a spreadsheet. "The next hour is yours. After that, I want you to stay nearby and await my call," Sammy instructed. "Of course, sir. Do you know what time that will be?" the driver asked. "What do you care? You're getting paid by the hour. Just enjoy your break and do what I tell you," Sammy snapped. The driver didn't enjoy the verbal abuse, but he swallowed his pride as he shut the door and made his way back around to the driver's side. The job paid too well to talk back. Meanwhile, Sammy walked forward toward the three men in suits who were standing at attention waiting for him. "So, are you my hired help for the evening?" Sammy asked, sizing them up. The largest of the men stepped forward. He was built like a linebacker, his physically imposing frame dwarfing Sammy's 5'8" stature. His suit was off the rack but clean, his shoes polished to a military shine. "The name's Connor, sir, and I'm the lead for tonight. This is Tony and Jimmy, and behind the wheel is Angelo," Connor said. Tony was shorter, but stocky, with the build of a boxer. Jimmy was lean and alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Both looked competent, professional. "I paid for 4 men, so he's not doing me much good behind the wheel, now is he, Connor?" Sammy said. The buff bodyguard's jaw tightened at Sammy's tone, but he kept his expression neutral. The money was good, too good to let pride interfere. "Angelo, go ahead and park and double-time it inside," Connor called out. "You got it, Connor," Angelo replied from the driver's seat. Angelo threw the SUV into drive, tires chirping as he headed toward the parking deck. The other 3 guards looked at Sammy, who stared right back at them with the expression of someone used to being obeyed. The standoff went on for several seconds before Sammy got agitated. "Well, are you going to clear the way for me, or what?" "Do I need to tell you how to do your job?" Sammy demanded. "I apologize, sir. I understand that we're not your regular crew, but we weren't given a copy of your itinerary," Connor said. Sammy let out a deep sigh before waving his hand dismissively. "Just follow me," Sammy said. Connor nodded and motioned for Tony and Jimmy to follow. The 4 of them walked through the casino's grand entrance past the doormen, who nodded in recognition of Sammy. Inside, the casino was quieter than normal. Usually at this time of night, there would be a hive of activity, crowds around the craps tables, cheers from Lucky Slots players, the constant chatter of excitement and desperation. Tonight, however, it was about half full, if that. Not that any of it mattered to Sammy. He wasn't the type to play blackjack alongside the common gamblers who filled the main casino floor. He moved through the front part of the building with purpose, heading toward the concierge desk positioned near the main check-in area. The concierge desk sat empty. Sammy didn't see anyone as he approached, focusing on the brass bell sitting on the marble counter. He rang it 6 times in rapid succession, the sharp dings echoing through the lobby. After several seconds of nobody appearing, he smacked it several more times with increasing anger. "If this is the kind of service I get, I can always take my business elsewhere," Sammy announced loudly. He spoke to nobody in particular, as if the casino itself should respond to his grievances. After a few moments of silence, Connor cleared his throat loud enough to get Sammy's attention. As the high roller looked back, he noticed Connor motioning toward a small sign positioned to the right of the bell. "Concierge out. Please see front desk for assistance." Sammy grumbled something under his breath about incompetence as he marched over to the front desk. A young woman stood behind it, and he watched her expression evolve from bored to fake cheerful customer service in a matter of seconds. "Good evening, sir, and welcome to the Silver Moon Casino. I'm Melody. How can I help you?" Melody said with practiced enthusiasm. "I'm Sammy Torrino, and I'm here for my usual private room," Sammy stated. Melody nodded and punched his name into her computer. After a few seconds of typing and clicking, she nodded and smiled. "I have you right here, Mr. Torrino. We have you in the 7th floor gaming suite," Melody said. "7th floor? That's not my usual room," Sammy complained. "I do apologize, sir, but we're short-staffed tonight, and this is where I'm told your gaming suite is set up," Melody explained, maintaining her professional demeanor. Sammy let out another sigh, muttering under his breath about declining standards as he turned and walked away from the front desk without another word. Melody called out as they departed. "I hope you enjoy your gaming experience with us, sir," Melody said cheerfully. She waited until he was well out of earshot before continuing, her voice dropping the fake customer service tone entirely. "What a joyless asshole. I hope you lose your shirt, you prick," Melody muttered. Sammy and his guards marched over to the elevator bank. Connor looked back and spotted Angelo jogging toward them through the casino floor, weaving between slot machines. The 5 men piled into the elevator, Connor pressing the button for the 7th floor. As the doors opened, they were greeted by a thin, middle-aged man in a Silver Moon uniform. His name tag read, Knox, and he was surprisingly energetic despite the late hour. "Hello there, Sammy. I'm glad you found us," Mr. Knox said. "Well, Knox, if you had my usual room ready, I wouldn't have had to come and find you," Sammy replied sharply. "I do apologize, Sammy, but I do have Henry waiting for you just down the hall here," Mr. Knox said, gesturing down the carpeted corridor. "Well, at least you got my dealer." "And my chips?" Sammy asked. $500,000 and $10,000 chips, Mr. Knox confirmed. "Good," Sammy said. Sammy followed Knox down the hallway for about 30 yards, their footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. They reached a set of double doors that Knox opened with a key card. Through the entrance was a spacious lounge, designed to hold small receptions or private parties. Tonight, however, there was only a single gaming table set up in the middle of the room, with Henry the dealer standing behind it in full uniform. Henry was in his 60s, with silver hair and the steady hands of someone who'd been dealing cards for decades. "It's good to see you again, Sammy," Henry said. "You too, Henry. I hope you heated those cards up because I'm ready to take this place for all it's worth," Sammy said. "I'll see what I can do for you, Sammy," Henry replied with a slight smile. As Sammy got situated at the table, plopping down a $10,000 chip for the first hand, Connor motioned for his men to secure the room. The 4 bodyguards spread out, checking every corner, every potential hiding spot. They confirmed the door they'd entered through was the only way in or out. "Can I get you a drink, Sammy?" Mr. Knox asked. "Get me my usual and make it a double," Sammy ordered. "And for your protection?" Mr. Knox inquired. "Whatever they want, as long as it's non-alcoholic," Sammy said dismissively. Knox nodded and walked over to Connor. "Can I get you and your men anything, sir?" Mr. Knox asked. "It's Connor." "And 4 coffees black," Connor replied. "Coming right up, sir," Mr. Knox said. As Knox exited the room to fetch their drinks, Connor took up a position right by the door, watching as Sammy gambled away months' worth of a normal person's salary on a single hand of cards. The chips clicked as Sammy pushed them forward, as casual as if they were pennies. Connor let out a quiet sigh, muttering to himself as Sammy tossed up another $10,000 chip like it was nothing. "I love you, Dad, but why couldn't you have been a land developer?" Connor said under his breath. Chapter 2, 3:15 a.m. Connor and his team continued standing at attention in the private gaming room as Sammy played blackjack. The last few hours had been a roller coaster for the high roller. He had built his stack nearly twice as high as when he started, only to see it fall back down below his starting level. The room smelled of expensive scotch and frustration. Empty glasses lined the edge of the table, and Sammy's tie hung loose around his neck. Henry the dealer remained professional, his movements smooth and consistent despite the late hour. Sammy took a long sip of his drink as he stared at the cards before him. He was showing 18, while the dealer had a 7 showing. Come on, one time," Sammy muttered. "So you stand?" Henry asked. "Yeah, now show me a 10, Sammy demanded. Henry nodded before flipping over his hole card, revealing a 4. Sammy began cursing loudly at the sight, which only intensified as the dealer flipped over another card for his hand, as the king landed, giving Henry 21. Sammy began cursing loudly as the dealer pulled his chips away from the high roller. In his rage, Sammy smacked his empty drink glass onto the floor. It shattered on impact, ice cubes and glass fragments scattering across the carpet. A few pieces hit Jimmy's legs. The guard's jaw tightened at the disrespect, and Connor could see the anger building on his co-worker's face. He stared his subordinate down with a look that said, "Not worth it." Jimmy reluctantly relaxed his posture. "I'm sorry, Sammy, that's 21, Henry said calmly. Yeah, just take your damn money," Sammy grumbled. Sammy looked at the spot where his drink used to be, getting frustrated that nothing was there now. He'd apparently forgotten he'd just sent it flying across the room. "Knox, get me some coffee up here. The good stuff, not any of that instant shit," Sammy barked. "Of course, Sammy," Mr. Knox replied. Mr. Knox took a few steps away from the table, pulling out a radio and clicking it on. "Kitchen, this is Knox. I need a pot of coffee to the gaming suite on 7, Mr. Knox said into the device. There was a long pause with nothing coming back on the radio. The static seemed louder in the quiet room. "Kitchen, this is Knox. I need coffee and I need it now," Mr. Knox repeated. Again there was a long pause with no response. Sammy could overhear as Henry dealt out another hand. "Jesus Christ, Knox, your man here is taking every dime from me, and you can't even get me a cup of coffee," Sammy complained. "I'm sorry, Sammy. I don't know why the kitchen isn't responding. I can run down there and—" Mr. Knox began. Sammy shook his head violently, cutting Knox off. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his wallet and extracting a $100 bill. He pointed at Jimmy, waving him over like he was summoning a dog. "You, go to the lobby and get me a cup of coffee," Sammy ordered. Jimmy looked like he was going to burst a blood vessel being talked to in that manner, but one look from Connor suppressed his reaction. "Right away, sir," Jimmy said through clenched teeth. Jimmy stepped forward, reaching for the 100, which Sammy didn't let go of initially. The high roller held onto it, making sure he had the guard's attention. "I see that look on your face, and I get it. I'm not the easiest client to deal with, but for what I'm paying you, you're gonna suck it up and take it like a man. Now, to show my generosity, get your boys there some coffee too. Hell, get a stack of pastries too," Sammy said. Jimmy tugged on the bill one more time, and Sammy finally released it. The guard didn't respond to the high roller, instead marching toward the door with barely controlled anger. "Don't take too long," Connor called after him. "Don't worry, it's not going to take me long to piss in his cup," Jimmy muttered. Connor cracked half a smile before opening the door for his man to leave. Jimmy walked back down the hallway to the elevator, his footsteps heavy on the carpet. He jabbed the call button harder than necessary and rode the car down to the first floor. As the doors opened, he stepped out and began walking back toward the front desk, looking around for the nearest coffee bar. The gaming area just across the way looked empty, which struck him as odd. While this hour of the night wasn't exactly high traffic time, he expected someone to be at the slot machines. Vegas never truly slept. Jimmy shook it off as he walked toward the front desk, but stopped several yards away when he realized nobody was behind it. The computer screens were still on, but Melody was nowhere to be seen. With a defeated sigh, he began looking around for coffee. After a few moments, he spotted a small coffee stand near the back wall, its neon sign still glowing. "Finally," Jimmy said to himself. Jimmy made his way over to it, doing breathing exercises to calm himself down. Being a bodyguard usually meant long hours and few thanks, but at least most clients showed basic respect. "You need this job, Jimmy. You need this job. A few more hours and this asshole is gone," Jimmy told himself. He was in a better mental state as he approached the coffee shop. However, he didn't see anybody behind the counter. The lights were on, machines were running, but no barista. "Oh, come on," Jimmy groaned. Jimmy looked around the back area but couldn't see anybody. "Hello? Is anybody there? You got a customer out here," Jimmy called out. As he waited, his eye caught sight of the milk steamer on the espresso machine, steam still rising from it. Someone had been here recently. Upon closer inspection, he saw a dark substance on the counter just to the side of it. In the dim light, it looked like spilled coffee, but something about it seemed wrong. "Is anybody hurt back there?" Jimmy asked, concern creeping into his voice. Jimmy looked down at the counter, spotting a service bell. Even though it went against his better judgment, he reached down to give it a smack. Before he did, however, he pulled his suit jacket back, just enough so that his sidearm was easily accessible. With a forceful smack, the bell rang out, the sound sharp in the quiet casino. After several moments with no response, he hit it a couple more times. Jimmy continued staring into the back area, expecting someone to emerge, but nobody came. As he contemplated just jumping the counter and fixing the coffee himself, he heard loud, quick footsteps coming from behind him. Jimmy glanced over his shoulder, spotting a bloody figure running straight for him from the slot machines. The woman looked to be pushing 60, gray-haired and wearing a sequined top that was torn and stained with blood. But she moved like she belonged in the defensive backfield, covering ground with impossible speed. Her eyes were vacant, her mouth bloody. "What the hell?" Jimmy shouted. Jimmy turned around just as she reached him. Rather than draw his handgun, the bodyguard threw his hands up defensively. Concerned about hurting what appeared to be an injured older woman, the zombified gambler smashed into him with enough force to send him stumbling backward into the counter. The small of his back cracked against the edge, sending pain shooting up his spine. Jimmy put one hand against her chest, the other toward her face in an attempt to push the crazed woman back. The creature took full advantage of his mistake, grabbing his hand and putting two of his fingers into its mouth clamping down hard. Jimmy let out a pained scream as he pulled back with all his strength, but the creature's jaws refused to give way. The top half of his 2 fingers were degloved, flesh and muscle being ripped from the bone. While agonizing, the maneuver was successful in freeing his hand. He shoved the ghoul back with his good hand, sending it tumbling to the ground. Jimmy was operating on pure instinct now. He used his good hand to pull his handgun and fired 4 shots in rapid succession. His years of training had taught him to shoot center mass. It was the fastest way to put someone down. In this situation, however, his training betrayed him. The bullet slammed into the creature's torso, punching through but doing nothing to stop it. Blood sprayed onto the carpeted floor, but the ghoul got back to its feet quickly, rushing toward the bewildered bodyguard again. Jimmy used his injured hand to hold the creature at bay, blood streaming from his mangled fingers. This gave him time to adjust his aim and put the gun right against the side of the creature's head. With a single squeeze of the trigger, the side of its skull exploded outward. As the zombie collapsed to the ground in a heap, Jimmy stared at it and his injury, his mind trying to process what had just happened. He stood there for several moments, unable to move, before a horrifying sound snapped him back to reality. Several moans echoed from the gaming floor, and within moments, 6 zombies swarmed toward him. "Oh my God!" Jimmy gasped. Jimmy opened fire, pulling the trigger as fast as he could. His aim was wild, panicked. Only 1 bullet found its target, dropping a zombie with a headshot. As the gun clicked empty, he squeezed the trigger a few more times out of reflex, but nothing happened. In a flash, the other 5 creatures were on him. 2 went low, biting into his legs through his suit pants. The other 3 went high, latching onto his arms and shoulder. Jimmy let out agonized screams as flesh was torn from his body, his nerves on fire. He thrashed wildly, trying to shake the creatures off. Through sheer adrenaline, he managed to knock a couple off his legs, allowing him to pivot and use his arms to shove the other 3 into each other. The move worked, freeing him briefly. He stumbled back toward the coffee shop, his legs buckling from the damage. He managed to stay upright long enough to reach the counter. As the zombies charged after him again, he pushed himself up. They slammed into him from behind, the impact sending him toppling over the counter. Jimmy landed hard on the floor behind the coffee bar. The only thing breaking his fall was the thin rubber mat the employees stood on. He crawled toward the back room, hearing the zombies moaning and thrashing just behind him, but he never looked back. Jimmy managed to get into the back room, slamming the door shut and turning the lock. He reached into his breast pocket for his radio with a shaking, blood-slicked hand. He clicked the button and began speaking, his voice weak. Connor, come in. Evacuate. Jimmy's voice trailed off. He realized his radio wasn't working. He pulled out the device only to find it had been damaged in the fall, the casing cracked, and display dark. He muttered curses as he looked around desperately for anything useful. After a moment, he spotted a fire alarm switch on the wall by the door, its red housing standing out against the beige paint. "This better get your ass moving, Connor," Jimmy wheezed. Jimmy willed himself across the floor, leaving a trail of blood as he dragged his failing body toward the alarm. He reached up, letting out pained grunts as his mangled hand grabbed the lever. With a final effort, he pulled it down. A split second later, the piercing wail of fire alarms filled the air throughout the entire casino. Jimmy slumped against the wall, unable to move further as blood pooled beneath him. "You better get out, Connor. You better get out," Jimmy whispered as darkness closed in. Chapter 3. Sammy stared down at his hand, 17, while the dealer was showing an 8. His chip stack had dwindled to less than half of where he'd started, and his frustration was building with each losing hand. "I swear to God, Henry, if there's a 10 under there, I'm gonna lose my mind," Sammy said through gritted teeth. Henry nodded apologetically as he flipped over his hole card, revealing a king, 18 to 17. Another loss. Sammy kicked his chair back violently, pacing back and forth across the private gaming room. "Henry, what are you doing to me, man?" Sammy demanded. "I'm sorry, Sammy. All I can do is shuffle and deal," Henry replied calmly. Sammy let out a frustrated sigh as he looked down at his shrinking pile of chips. 200,000 gone, just like that. He picked up his chair, dragging it back to the table and taking a seat. He grabbed another $10,000 chip, tossing it forward. Before Henry could deal the next hand, the fire alarm began blaring throughout the casino. The piercing wail filled the room, making everyone wince. "Are you kidding me with this shit, Knox?" Sammy shouted over the noise. Mr. Knox didn't respond to Sammy. Instead, he grabbed his radio and changed the frequency with quick fingers. Front desk, what's with the fire alarm?" Mr. Knox said into the device. A long pause with no response. Knox's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. "Melody, where are you? I need to know if there's a fire." Mr. Knox tried again. Again, no response. Connor could see the worry building on Knox's face. The bodyguard broke away from his position by the door, walking straight to Sammy. "Sir, we should get you back to the vehicle," Connor said firmly. "Oh, give it a rest, Connor. This is probably just some dumbass kid pulling a prank. It'll be cut off in a minute. Isn't that right, Knox?" Sammy said dismissively. The stand-in concierge gave a half-hearted nod. He was concerned that he hadn't been able to reach his staff over the radio, but his instincts told him to keep the high roller happy. "I tell you what, Sammy, you just keep playing, and I'll go inspect this personally," Mr. Knox offered. "Yeah, you do that, Knox. You do that," Sammy said, already turning back to the table. As Knox hurried through the door, Connor looked down at Sammy, who ignored him and focused on his next hand. The alarm seemed to fade away for the gambler as Henry dealt the cards. An ace and a king, natural 21. "Hell yeah, now we're talking," Sammy exclaimed, pumping his fist. "Sir, I think we should—" Connor began. Connor was cut off by Sammy, waving his hand dismissively in his direction. Rather than force the issue, he took a step back. Angelo and Tony walked over to him, concern evident on their faces. "So, we're not moving him?" Tony asked quietly. "Not yet. He's probably right that this is some sort of prank and that there's no fire," Connor replied, though his tone suggested doubt. "Really, Connor?" Angelo pressed. "Jimmy's in the lobby, so if something is going on down there, he would be calling it in," Connor reasoned. "I'll get him on the line, see what he's seeing," Tony said. Connor nodded as Tony took a few steps away, pulling out his radio. Angelo stayed close, lowering his voice. "Are you sure about this, Connor?" Angelo asked. "There's a stairwell 10 yards to our right, which will take us down to the 5th floor. There's a walkway leading across to the parking deck, and if you did your job correctly, our ride should be waiting for us," Connor explained. Angelo nodded, getting a smile on his face despite the tension. "The SUV is backed into the spot right across from the walkway." "Just like you wanted," Angelo confirmed. "Good man. So, for now, we let this ride out," Connor said. Angelo nodded as Tony walked back over, shaking his head with a worried expression. "What is it?" Connor asked. "It's Jimmy. I can't get him on the line," Tony reported. "Knowing him, he probably took out his earpiece to flirt with the barista," Angelo suggested. "Hell, knowing Jimmy, with the way that asshole treated him, he probably set the fire himself," Tony added. "Enough. Get back to your posts and be ready to move when I say it's time," Connor ordered. Angelo and Tony nodded before returning to their positions. The fire alarm continued its relentless wailing. 20 long minutes passed with no sign of it stopping. Sammy continued playing, somehow tuning out the noise as he focused on his cards. Henry dealt with mechanical precision, seemingly unbothered by the alarm. Connor stepped away from the door as it opened. Mr. Knox entered, his face flushed from exertion. "What were you able to find out?" Connor asked. "I walked around the entirety of this floor, looking out windows from every angle. If there's a fire, it's not that big, so I don't think there's anything to worry about," Mr. Knox reported. "Have you been able to reach any of your people?" "The kitchen, front desk?" Connor pressed. Knox shook his head no, his concern growing. "I haven't, but we've been extremely short-staffed the last couple of days, so they're probably busy putting out fires." "Well, metaphorical ones at any rate," Mr. Knox said, trying to sound reassuring. Connor thought about it for a moment before waving his men over. "Have you heard from Jimmy?" Connor asked them. Both bodyguards shook their heads no. "Okay, we're calling it. Tony, secure the hallway. Angelo, you're with me," Connor decided. Connor and Angelo made their way over to the gaming table, where Sammy was intently focused on the next hand. As Connor began to speak, Sammy put his hand up, stopping him before a single syllable could come out. "I swear to God, Connor, if you jinx me," Sammy warned. Sammy trailed off as the dealer flipped over his hole card, a 5, giving him 13. Another card flip revealed a jack. Bust. Sammy pumped his fist at another win. "Hell yeah, I'm on a roll now," Sammy celebrated. "Well, that roll is going to have to end there, because we need to evacuate you to the vehicle right now," Connor said with authority. "Connor, remember, I told you to relax. Well, I'm going to need you to do that," Sammy said condescendingly. "It's my job to protect you, and right now I need to," Connor insisted. Sammy smacked his hand down on the table hard enough to make the chips jump. He wasn't used to his business equals talking to him in such a way, and he certainly wasn't going to let hired help speak to him like that. "You listen here, and you listen good. We go when I say we go. Do you understand me?" Sammy barked. Connor struggled against the urge to grab Sammy and yank him out of the chair, to drag him to safety like a misbehaving child. Before he could act on the impulse, gunshots popped off from the hallway. The sharp cracks cut through even the fire alarm's wail. Connor and Angelo immediately took up positions between Sammy and the door, their weapons drawn. The high roller's bravado evaporated at the first hint of real trouble. A moment later, the door burst open. Tony stumbled backward through it, firing his handgun repeatedly. He continued firing into the chests of two people that were rushing him. A man in a torn business suit and a woman in a cocktail dress, both covered in blood. The bullets punched through their torsos but didn't slow them down. They slammed into Tony with inhuman force. The guard stumbled backward, landing hard on the floor. His free hand grasped for anything to steady himself, but ended up grabbing the arm of one of the attacking creatures. The bloody zombified man fell on top of Tony, mouth snapping at his face. "Get this asshole off of me!" Tony shouted. Connor broke from his defensive position, darting over to his partner. He grabbed the attacker by the back of the shirt, using his considerable strength and momentum to pull the ghoul off. The creature flew backward, crashing against the wall in a seated position. Connor quick drew his handgun, firing 3 shots center mass out of instinct. The bullets went right through the chest, spraying blood on the wallpaper, but doing nothing to slow the creature down. It immediately started getting back up. Connor darted forward, delivering a powerful front kick that sent the zombie back to the ground. The hulking bodyguard adjusted his aim, sending a single round through the zombie's head. The skull shattered, brain matter spattering the wall as the ghoul slumped motionless. As Connor stared down at the corpse to ensure it was truly dead, he heard Mr. Knox yelling for help from across the room. He turned to see the other zombie, the woman in the party dress, latching onto Knox's throat with her teeth. She yanked her head back violently, ripping out his Adam's apple. Blood gushed from the wound in spurts, painting the carpet crimson. "Oh my God!" Henry shouted. Henry dropped the cards, scattering them across the table as he ran for the door. He didn't even glance back before throwing it open and darting out into the hallway. "Angelo, aim for the head!" Connor commanded. Angelo reacted swiftly, adjusting his aim and firing a single round through the creature's skull. It dropped instantly, falling across Knox's body. The room fell quiet except for the constant ringing of the fire alarm. Knox lay on the floor, blood pooling beneath him, his body twitching in its final moments. Connor snapped into command mode, taking control of the situation. "Tony, secure the door. Angelo, check Knox," Connor ordered. The two men leapt into action. Tony got to his feet and moved to the door, weapon ready. Angelo approached Knox cautiously. Connor moved over to Sammy, who was sitting frozen in his chair, face pale from witnessing the violence. "Sammy, are you hurt?" Connor asked. Sammy remained silent, staring at the blood on the floor. Connor grabbed his shoulders and shook him lightly. "Sammy, are you with me? Are you hurt?" Connor repeated more forcefully. Sammy snapped out of it, shaking his head. "No, I'm fine," Sammy managed. He flinched as Angelo fired a single shot. "What in the hell was that for?" Sammy demanded. "Knox, he started moving," Angelo explained, his voice shaky. "So, you killed him?" Sammy asked incredulously. Angelo shook his head, struggling to explain what he'd seen. "Nah, man, he was dead. Like dead. But then he started moving again, and not in a normal way," Angelo said. Connor broke away from Sammy, walking over to the first zombie he'd put down. He examined the body more closely. The man had a massive bite wound on his neck, the flesh torn away. He couldn't explain it, but somehow the bites were causing people to go mad, or worse. "Tony, how are we looking out there?" Connor called out. Tony had the door cracked, peering out into the hallway. "We're clear right in front," Tony reported. "Good. Angelo, give me the keys, because I'm driving." "Tony, secure the package and get ready to move. We're getting out of here," Connor commanded. Chapter 4. Connor took up position by the door, his handgun at the ready. The weight of the weapon was familiar in his hand, though he'd never imagined using it like this, against what used to be people. Tony had his hand on Sammy's shoulder, standing just behind. Angelo brought up the rear, everyone armed and ready for the worst once they were through the door. "We're moving to the left to the stairwell, down to 5 and across to the parking deck. Move fast and shoot anybody that's running at us," Connor instructed. "What about Jimmy?" Tony asked. "He's a big boy. He can handle himself," Connor replied, though his tone suggested he knew better. Tony wasn't thrilled with the answer, but nodded in agreement nonetheless. They all knew Jimmy would have called in by now if he could. As they prepared to exit, the building rattled with the sound of an explosion. The windows vibrated in their frames, and dust fell from the ceiling tiles. "What in the hell is happening out there?" Angelo asked. "I don't want to stick around to find out." "So, do your damn job and get me out of here," Sammy demanded. The 3 guards exchanged annoyed looks, their patience with Sammy's attitude wearing thin. Connor paused for a moment before turning to the door, his hand on the handle. "I'm going out first to clear the hallway. When I give the signal, we move," Connor said. The others gave him a nod, even Sammy, who understood they were his only chance of getting out of the casino in one piece. Connor pulled the door open slowly, stepping out into the hallway and sweeping to the left in the direction of the stairwell. The path was clear, but he heard an unnerving sound coming from the right, wet, tearing noises mixed with grunts. Connor turned and spotted 3 creatures about 30 yards down, all crouched around a fallen figure on the ground. They were ripping flesh from bone, chewing and swallowing, completely oblivious to his presence. The victim was long past helping, their casino uniform torn and bloodied. Connor kept his gun trained on them, as he used his offhand to motion for the others to come out. He put his finger to his lips, signaling for quiet, then pointed to the threat down the hall. The 3 others exited the room, moving as quietly as they could. Connor retreated toward the stairwell, taking point. As they moved, the gaming room door clicked shut behind them. The sound was soft, but in the relative quiet, it might as well have been a gunshot. One of the feeding ghouls looked up, blood dripping from its chin. It let out an excited moan before scrambling to its feet and breaking into that inhuman sprint. "Angelo, take it down," Connor commanded. Angelo wasted no time raising his handgun and firing. He squeezed off 3 rounds in rapid succession, his aim true despite the pressure. The first bullet ripped through the creature's jaw, sending teeth flying. The other 2 hit higher up on the head, dropping it instantly, but the gunshots alerted every creature on the floor. "Contact front," Connor shouted. Connor pushed toward the stairwell, firing as he ran. A handful of creatures came running from around the corner ahead, emerging from a side hallway. One bullet found its mark, the zombie's head snapping back as it collapsed. The brief delay gave him enough time to reach the stairwell door. Connor burst through the opening, the heavy door smacking against something on the other side. He heard a grunt of impact. The bodyguard stepped onto the landing, coming around the door's edge to find a zombie staggering from the blow. Without hesitation, he fired a single round into its head. The gunshot echoed off the concrete walls of the stairwell, amplified in the enclosed space. Almost immediately, zombie moans answered from both above and below, the sound bouncing off the walls in a terrifying chorus. "We have to move!" Connor yelled. Connor began descending, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He reached the next landing just as 2 zombies were running up from below. They moved with that disturbing speed, arms outstretched. He delivered a forceful front kick to the lead ghoul, his boot connecting solidly with its chest. It tumbled backward into its companion, both landing hard on the concrete stairs in a tangle of limbs. Connor rushed down, planting his foot on the chest of the top creature to pin them both. 2 quick shots to their heads ended the threat. He looked back, watching Tony guide Sammy down to his position. The high roller's face was pale, his expensive suit disheveled. On the landing above, Angelo rushed into the stairwell, slamming the door shut behind him, but immediately he had to put his shoulder against it as zombies crashed into it from the other side. The door buckled under the assault, opening slightly despite his efforts. "Angelo!" Connor called up. "Get to the 5th floor. I'll catch up," Angelo shouted back. Connor's first instinct was to help his friend, but through the gap in the door, he could see the zombie mass pressing through. Arms reached around, clawing at Angelo. The sound of footsteps and moans echoing from above sealed his decision. He had to lead the others to safety. Angelo struggled against the combined weight of the zombies. He shifted his handgun to his offhand, the one closest to the door's opening. The bodyguard stuck it through the gap at head level, pulling the trigger repeatedly. He couldn't see if he was hitting heads, but he felt the pressure on the door lessen slightly. One arm that had been clawing at his face suddenly went limp, dropping to the ground and wedging between the door and frame, preventing it from closing completely. Angelo emptied the magazine, ejecting it with a quick motion before slapping in a fresh one. Before he could take aim again, he heard thundering footsteps from above. He turned to see 4 creatures on the landing above him, their dead eyes locked on him. "Damn it," Angelo cursed. He knew he didn't have time to put them all down. His only option was to break from the door and try to reach the others. He pushed off hard, using the door for leverage to propel himself toward the stairs. He got halfway down the first flight when one of the zombies chasing him got knocked off balance by the door bursting open behind them. The creature tumbled forward, rolling through Angelo's legs and tangling them up. Angelo went down hard, his face striking the concrete landing below. The impact dazed him, stars exploding across his vision. The moaning of approaching zombies partially snapped him out of it. Angelo flipped onto his back, raising his handgun and firing as fast as he could at the mob descending on him. "Get some, bitches, get some!" Angelo shouted defiantly. Despite his bravado, his firepower was no match for the horde bearing down on him. One shot found its mark, dropping the lead creature onto his legs, pinning him partially. Angelo kicked desperately, trying to free himself, but it wasn't enough. In seconds, ghouls swarmed him from multiple angles. He screamed in pain as teeth tore into his arms and shoulders. He continued firing, shooting 2 of his killers at point-blank range, their heads exploding in sprays of gore. But more kept coming, and soon he lost the strength to pull the trigger. On the 5th floor landing below, Connor could hear Angelo's screams and desperate last stand. The gunshots stopped, replaced by wet, tearing sounds. He didn't bother calling out, knowing his friend wasn't coming down those stairs. At least, not as the man he knew. Connor paused at the door, the weight of losing Angelo hitting him. They'd worked together for 3 years, had each other's backs through bar fights and difficult clients. Now he was gone. Forget him, he's gone. "Now do your job and get me the hell out of here," Sammy barked. Connor's first instinct was to punch the high roller and leave him to his fate. But somewhere in his mind, the old world still existed, bills to pay, a reputation to maintain. Despite everything, he found himself still doing his job. He stared Sammy down, his voice cold and forceful. "Shut your mouth and do what I tell you," Connor said. Sammy was taken aback, not used to being spoken to in that manner. As he opened his mouth to protest, Connor turned and threw open the door. "Let's move, now!" Connor commanded. Connor led the trio out onto the 5th floor. The scene was chaotic. Several packs of zombies scattered throughout the hallway, most feasting on unfortunate souls who had taken the fire alarm seriously and tried to evacuate. Blood painted the walls and carpet in abstract patterns. One creature spotted them immediately, abandoning its meal to sprint toward them. Rather than fire his gun and alert the others, Connor stepped forward and used the butt of his weapon like a club, bringing it down hard on the zombie's forehead. The crack of bone was audible. The creature dropped, and Connor delivered another strike to ensure it stayed down. Connor turned, motioning for the others to follow. They made it halfway across the floor toward the parking deck walkway when gunfire erupted behind him. Tony had engaged 3 zombies rushing their position, dropping the lead one with a headshot. Connor reacted swiftly, raising his handgun and joining Tony's barrage. Together they put both remaining ghouls down, but the noise had given away their position. Moans rose from every direction. "We gotta go now!" Connor shouted. He turned and sprinted toward the walkway, lowering his shoulder to plow through 2 zombies converging on their path. The impact sent them flying, clearing the way for Tony and Sammy to push through. The trio ran down the enclosed walkway connecting to the parking deck. The glass walls on either side showed the city beyond, which was showing the first signs of falling apart. But the walkway itself was clear. Connor glanced over his shoulder. Tony and Sammy were a few steps behind, but a dozen zombies were less than 10 yards back, gaining ground with every second. Connor reached into his pocket, pulling out the keys and hitting the fob. The SUV's lights flashed in response, giving them their target. It sat exactly where Angelo had left it, backed into the spot facing the exit. All three men rushed to the vehicle, yanking open doors and piling in. Connor threw on his seatbelt as he started the engine, the V8 roaring to life. "Everybody hang on, this is going to be a bumpy ride," Connor warned. Chapter 5. Connor hit the gas on the SUV, plowing through the zombies directly in front of them. The vehicle bounced violently as they rolled over the bodies, the suspension groaning from the impacts. He kept the accelerator down, picking up speed as they descended through the parking deck's spiral ramps. The concrete walls echoed with the sound of squealing tires and the engine's roar. Tony looked in the side mirror, watching as a mob of zombies followed them around every turn. They poured down the ramps like water, never slowing despite some tumbling and falling in their pursuit. "They're still on us, Connor," Tony reported, his voice tight with concern. "We'll lose them in the street," Connor replied, though he wasn't entirely confident. Tony turned to check the back seat, where Sammy was sliding around on the leather, his manicured hands fumbling with the seatbelt. The high roller's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. The bodyguard reached back, grabbing onto Sammy's legs to steady him long enough for the belt to click into place. The tires continued to squeal around every corner, leaving black marks on the concrete as they descended level after level. The zombies behind them showed no signs of tiring, their inhuman endurance allowing them to maintain their sprint. After another few moments of controlled chaos, they got the exit within view. Another car shot through just ahead of them, its taillights disappearing into the night. Connor kept the speed up as the automated crossbar began to descend. The mechanism was slow, designed for normal traffic flow, not emergency escapes. He managed to get them through with inches to spare, the bar scraping along the SUV's roof with a metallic shriek. Through the windshield, he watched as the car that had exited before them turned left and was swarmed by zombies. The creatures came from every direction, throwing themselves at the vehicle with abandon. "Hang on!" Connor shouted. Connor cut the wheel sharply to the right, the SUV's rear end sliding out in a wide arc. The tires smoked as they fought for traction, finally gripping the asphalt and launching them forward. He let out an involuntary yell as another car came speeding down the street directly at them, missing their front bumper by mere feet. Connor glanced in the rearview mirror, watching as the car that had nearly killed them lost control. It spun twice before slamming into a storefront, glass exploding inward. The driver's airbag deployed, but Connor could already see zombies converging on the wreck. He allowed his gaze to linger for a moment too long. "Eyes front!" Tony yelled. Connor snapped his attention back to driving, slamming on the brakes as another out-of-control car cut across their lane. A sedan driven by someone clearly panicking, weaving wildly as zombies chased it. While he didn't come to a full stop, Connor slowed just enough for the vehicle to miss them by inches, close enough that he could see the terror on the other driver's face. The sedan clipped a pickup truck parked on the street, sending it spinning. The truck slammed into a light pole with tremendous force, the impact jarring the pole loose from its moorings. The massive steel structure began toppling toward the street. Connor slammed on the gas, the SUV surging forward just far enough that the pole crashed down behind them, sparks flying as electrical wires snapped. As they reached the next block, Connor checked his mirrors again. Zombies were swarming the crashed pickup, their hands pounding on the windows as the driver inside screamed. There was nothing they could do. Connor reached the next intersection and turned right, speeding into the relative darkness of a side street. "Where are we going?" Tony asked, checking his weapons magazine. "I don't know. I'm just trying to get us off the strip," Connor admitted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I'll tell you where we're going." "You're going to take me home to Lake Las Vegas," Sammy declared from the back seat, his voice regaining some of its usual arrogance now that immediate danger had passed. Tony and Connor shared a side-eyed glance. Lake Las Vegas was an exclusive community built around a man-made lake, home to multi-million-dollar estates and 2 golf courses. It was also a significant distance away through what was rapidly becoming a war zone. "That is way southeast of here, Sammy. With the way the streets are, I'm not sure we're going to make it more than a few blocks," Tony said, trying to inject reality into the conversation. "Well, it's your job to get me home safe, and that's what you're going to do," Sammy snapped. Connor's patience finally snapped. He slammed on the brakes, bringing the SUV to a complete stop in the middle of the street. The tires left dark marks on the asphalt. Sammy began freaking out as he saw zombies running at them from down the road, drawn by their engine noise. "What are you doing? Drive, man, drive!" Sammy shouted. "Not until you give me a good reason not to kick your ass out of the car right now," Connor said, turning to stare at the high roller. Connor's eyes were cold, deadly serious. The professional distance he'd maintained all night was gone. The first zombies reached the SUV, their dead hands smacking against the windows, leaving bloody prints on the glass. "Because let me tell you, self-preservation is quickly surpassing my will to keep this job. So give me a reason to keep protecting you," Connor continued. Sammy's panic escalated as more zombies surrounded the vehicle. They pressed their faces against the glass, teeth gnashing, trying to find a way in. One particularly damaged zombie, missing half its face, pressed its remaining eye against Sammy's window, staring directly at him. Okay, fine. If you get me home, I'll bring you into the community," Sammy blurted out. Connor and Tony exchanged a quick glance, silently debating whether the offer was worth the risk. Sammy could see their doubt and pressed on desperately. "It's completely safe down there. 10-foot-tall fence surrounding it, and armed security. You can ride out whatever is going on in style. Hell, I even have a pool house that's bigger than wherever you're living now. It's yours if you get me there," Sammy promised. Tony gave Connor a subtle nod. A secure location with supplies and defenses might be their best chance of survival. Connor let off the brakes and started driving again, the SUV pushing through the small collection of zombies that had surrounded them. Bodies bounced off the front bumper as they accelerated. "Okay, Lake Las Vegas, let's get you home, Sammy," Connor said. They drove south for several miles, the zombie population thinning somewhat as they reached less crowded residential areas. The houses here were middle class, with neat lawns and 2-car garages. Some had lights on, shadows moving behind curtains. Others were dark, doors standing open ominously. Connor slowed at intersections but didn't come to full stops, not wanting to give creatures a chance to converge on them. He rolled through, checking quickly for oncoming traffic or zombie hordes. As he crossed the next side street, already halfway through the intersection, Tony yelled out in alarm. "Gun it, gun it!" Tony shouted. Connor reacted instantly, hitting the gas without seeing what had spooked his partner. A split second later, a massive impact struck the rear quarter panel of the SUV. The world spun violently as their vehicle was tossed sideways, rotating twice before coming to rest, facing the wrong direction. Connor's head rang from the impact, his vision blurry. Through the cracked windshield, he could see a smaller sedan that was completely destroyed, its front end compressed like an accordion. In the driver's seat, a man lay motionless against the deployed airbag, blood trickling from his nose. "Is everybody okay?" Connor asked, shaking his head to clear it. Both Tony and Sammy muttered affirmatives, though Sammy sounded dazed. Connor turned the key in the ignition, amazed when the SUV's engine turned over and started. However, when he pressed the gas, they didn't move forward. Instead, there was a grinding noise from the rear. Connor looked in the side mirror, his heart sinking. The rear axle had been knocked loose from the frame, twisted at an unnatural angle. One rear wheel was turned completely sideways. They weren't going anywhere in this vehicle. "Come on, we have to move," Connor ordered. Connor forced his door open, the frame bent from the impact. He stumbled out, using the wrecked vehicle for support until his legs steadied. His hand went immediately to his handgun, drawing it as he scanned their surroundings. They were in a small business district, the kind that served the local community rather than tourists. A dry cleaner, a tax office, all closed and dark. The only place with lights still on was a diner across the street, its neon sign casting red and blue light across the parking lot. A few vehicles sat out front, but Connor saw no movement through the large windows. "Come on, Sammy, on your feet," Tony said, pulling open the rear door. The door protested, requiring Tony to put his shoulder into it. He helped Sammy out onto the street. The high roller was unsteady, his expensive suit torn at the shoulder. "Where are we going?" Tony asked. Connor's first instinct was to break into one of the closed businesses, but that would likely trigger an alarm. In the current situation, that might not bring police, but it would certainly attract zombies. The diner, despite being exposed, might offer supplies and multiple exits. "Connor, we got company," Tony warned. Connor turned to see a horde of ghouls running down the street toward them, at least 20, maybe more. They moved in that horrifying synchronized sprint, like a pack of wolves that had spotted prey. "Get to the diner, let's move," Connor commanded. The three men ran across the street as fast as their post-crash bodies would allow. Connor reached the diner first, pulling open the glass door and darting inside with his handgun raised. The scene inside was horrific. Blood pooled on the checkered floor and splattered across tables. A partially eaten body in a waitress uniform lay sprawled near the counter. Another corpse, this one in cook's whites, was slumped in a corner, but there were no moving creatures visible, just the aftermath of slaughter. Then Connor heard it, faint moaning and banging coming from the kitchen area. Tony and Sammy burst through the door behind him. Tony quickly turned to pull the door shut, flipping the deadbolt and stepping back. "We're in," Tony reported. Connor held up his hand for silence, then motioned toward the source of the noise. Tony understood immediately, pointing to a nearby booth. "Sit there and stay quiet," Tony told Sammy. The high roller did as instructed, sliding into the vinyl booth, trying not to look at the blood splattered on the adjacent table. The two bodyguards moved carefully through the diner, weapons ready, stepping over pooled blood as they approached the kitchen's swinging doors. Connor peered through the circular window in the door. Half a dozen zombies were clustered around the walk-in cooler, pounding on its metal door, trying to reach whatever was inside. The zombies were a mix of customers and staff, their clothes torn and bloody, chunks of flesh missing from various body parts. Connor scanned the kitchen layout. A freestanding prep island stood just to their right, stainless steel and solid. It would provide some cover. He pointed it out to Tony, who nodded understanding. They pushed through the swinging door quietly, taking position behind the island. Connor counted down on his fingers. 3, 2, 1. They opened fire simultaneously, their first shots taking down 2 zombies with clean headshots. The noise drew the attention of the remaining ghouls, who abandoned the cooler door and rushed toward them. The bodyguards remained calm, taking careful aim, despite the creature's speed. Their training served them well. Controlled breathing, squeeze don't pull, follow through. In seconds, the remaining zombies were down, bodies crumpled on the tile floor. "What do you think had their interest?" Tony asked, looking at the cooler door. "I don't know, but I think we should find out," Connor replied. Connor checked his magazine. 6 rounds left, plus 1 in the chamber. He slapped it back into his weapon and approached the cooler cautiously. The heavy door showed scratches from fingernails, bloody handprints smeared across its surface. Connor grabbed the handle, pulling it open just enough to trigger the interior light. Near the back, a waitress sat propped against boxes of produce. She was young, maybe 20, with multiple bite wounds on her arms and neck. Blood had pooled beneath her, and her skin was deathly pale. She reached out weakly, her eyes pleading for help that couldn't come. Both bodyguards' expressions fell. They knew what those bites meant. The woman was dying, and when she did, she'd become one of those things. Tony tapped Connor's shoulder, stepping forward. "I'll take care of her. You go figure out how the hell we're getting out of this," Tony said quietly. Connor nodded, grateful his partner would handle this grim task. He walked back to the dining area, where Sammy sat in his booth, looking terrified. The high roller had finally grasped that his money and connections meant nothing now. "Is everything okay back there?" Sammy asked, his voice small. Before Connor could answer, a single gunshot echoed from the kitchen. Sammy flinched, his hands shaking. "It is now," Connor said simply. Connor stepped to the large window facing the street. A dozen zombies were pressed against the glass, their faces leaving bloody smears as they tried to push through. More were arriving every moment, drawn by the noise the others were making. The glass was holding for now, but Connor could see small cracks beginning to form, where the creatures pounded most insistently. "What are we going to do?" Sammy asked. I'm still working that out, Sammy. I'm still working that out. Chapter 6. Connor, Tony, and Sammy sat behind the front counter of the diner, their backs against the worn wood paneling. The zombies outside continued their relentless assault on the windows, their dead hands leaving bloody streaks on the glass with each impact. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Thump, thump, scrape. Being out of direct sight had caused a few zombies to lose interest and wander away, but most remained, drawn by some primal knowledge that prey was inside. "I'm guessing we're still a ways away from Lake Las Vegas?" Tony asked, checking his ammunition situation. He had one full magazine left, plus what remained in his current one. "Easily 8 or 9 miles, Sammy replied, his voice carrying less of its usual arrogance and more genuine fear. "Yeah, I'm not running that on a clear day," Tony said. "So what are you going to do?" Sammy demanded, the fear making his voice rise slightly. Tony looked around their makeshift shelter, taking in the supplies available. The diner had food, water, and solid walls. It wasn't the worst place to hole up, at least temporarily. "Connor, you got any ideas? Because this place is locked up tight, and part of me is content with just sitting here," Tony said. Sammy's reaction was immediate and violent, his face flushed red with anger. "Hell no! You're going to get me home. Why in the world would you want to stay locked up in a third-rate diner?" Sammy snapped. "Well, they have a tuna melt special that sounds pretty good right about now," Tony replied dryly, pointing to the menu board above them. Sammy began to get more agitated, his hands gesturing wildly as he prepared another tirade. Connor stepped in before things could escalate, taking control of the conversation with his commanding presence. "No, we have to keep moving. There aren't too many of those people out front now, but by dawn, who knows? I don't trust that glass to hold up against a horde," Connor said. The windows were standard commercial glass, thick but not reinforced. They'd hold against a dozen zombies, maybe 2 dozen, but if hundreds showed up, drawn by noise or movement, the glass would eventually give way, and once one window broke, the rest would follow quickly under the pressure. Tony thought about Connor's assessment for a moment before nodding. His expression changed as an idea sparked. He carefully poked his head over the counter, just enough to see past the zombies to the vehicles in the parking lot. There were 5 cars total, 2 sedans, an SUV, a minivan, and a pickup truck. "What are you doing?" Sammy hissed, afraid Tony's movement would attract more attention. "I think I know how we're getting out of here," Tony said, ducking back down. "How are you pulling that off?" Sammy asked skeptically. "It's not a bad question, Tony," Connor added, though his tone suggested he was willing to hear his partner out. "We're going to use the pickup truck out there," Tony explained, pointing through the gap under the counter toward the parking lot. "You know how to hotwire it?" Sammy asked. Tony shook his head, a slight smile crossing his face despite their situation. "Nope, but I'm willing to bet the keys are in here. We just have to find them," Tony said. He motioned toward the kitchen, where the collection of zombified corpses lay on the tile floor. The bodies were still fresh, maybe an hour or 2, dead at most. Their pockets would still have whatever they'd carried in life. Sammy's face went pale at the implication, shaking his head vigorously. "There is no way I'm digging through those pockets," Sammy declared. Connor smacked the high roller on the arm as he got up from his seated position, his patience with Sammy's attitude wearing thin. "Yeah, we know, Sammy. You're not going to lift a finger to help us out. Don't worry, we got it," Connor said, with barely concealed contempt. Connor and Tony made their way back into the kitchen, the smell of death stronger here, where the bodies lay. They took a knee beside the pile of corpses, beginning the grim task of searching the dead. The first body was a cook, his white uniform now mostly red. His pockets contained a wallet, some change, and a pack of cigarettes, but no keys. The second corpse had been a customer, an older man in jeans and a flannel shirt. As Tony reached into the man's pocket, he yanked his hand free suddenly, his face contorting in disgust. "Are you good, Tony?" Connor asked, looking up from his own search. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just felt something gross on my hand," Tony replied, examining his fingers with revulsion. Tony chuckled at his own reaction, recognizing the absurdity of being squeamish, given everything they'd been through. He sucked it up and plunged his hand back into the pocket, this time pulling out a set of keys. They continued their methodical search, trying not to think about who these people had been just hours ago. A waitress with a photo of her kids in her wallet. A customer with a business card, identifying him as an insurance adjuster. Regular people whose regular lives had ended in terror and violence. After a few minutes of searching, they had 5 sets of keys laid out on the stainless steel kitchen island. Each set was different, some with multiple keys and keychains, others just a simple fob. One had a rabbit's foot attached, probably not so lucky after all. "All right, let's see if we got lucky," Connor said, gathering up the keys. They collected the keys and walked back out into the front part of the diner. Sammy was still crouched behind the counter, having not moved an inch while they did the dirty work. One by one, they clicked the unlock button on each key fob, watching through the windows to see which vehicle would respond. The first fob did nothing. Given how old it was possible the battery was dead, just like its owner. The second fob caused the minivan to chirp, but they dismissed it out of hand. Too slow, too visible, and terrible off-road if they needed to leave the pavement. On the third try, the pickup truck's lights flickered on and off. The headlights and taillights flashed twice, and they could hear the faint click of the doors unlocking even through the windows. Just to be certain, Connor hit the button again, watching the lights flash in confirmation. "All right, we have us a ride," Connor announced. "Yeah, now you just have to figure out how we're getting to it," Sammy pointed out, gesturing at the zombies still pressed against the windows. The truck was parked about 20 feet from the door, but there were at least a dozen zombies between them and it. More were scattered throughout the parking lot, wandering aimlessly until something caught their attention. Connor and Tony looked out the window, trying to figure out their approach. Connor continued staring for a moment, his tactical mind working through options. Then he reached down and grabbed one of the sets of keys they hadn't tried yet. "What are you thinking, Connor?" Tony asked, recognizing the look on his partner's face. The lead bodyguard hit the unlock button, watching as a sedan at the far end of the parking lot lit up. It was parked near the street, at least 40 feet from their target truck. He smirked as he examined the fob more closely, noting that it had a panic button marked with a red alarm symbol. "We're going to get ourselves a little diversion," Connor explained. Connor held up the fob to the others, showing off the alarm button. Sammy shook his head no, his face showing panic at the idea. Tony, conversely, nodded yes, understanding what Connor was thinking. "You can shake your head all you like, Sammy. This is what we're doing," Tony said firmly. "And how are you going to protect me from that mob once they spot us?" Sammy demanded. Connor's expression hardened, his patience finally exhausted. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge that made Sammy shrink back slightly. "I would hope you'd be running as fast as we are. But if you need motivation, I can shoot at your feet to get them moving," Connor said. Sammy stared at Connor with a mixture of anger and fear, which did nothing but make Connor smirk. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Sammy's money meant nothing now, and they all knew it. "Come on, we need to do this now, before more of those people show up," Connor said, already moving toward the door. Connor led them out from behind the counter, staying low as they moved to avoid being seen through the windows. They took up position by the front door, ducking behind the hostess stand that offered some concealment. "Okay, I'm hitting this. We're waiting 10 seconds, then moving. I'm driving. If there's time, get around to the passenger side," Connor instructed. "And if there's not?" Tony asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be ideal. "Then the two of you get into the truck bed. I'll open the back window so you can climb through," Connor replied. "I can work with that. Sammy, you on board?" Tony asked. Sammy clearly wasn't pleased with any aspect of the plan. His face showed a mixture of fear, anger, and resignation. But he also understood that if he didn't go along with it, he would be stuck in the diner alone. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Yeah, let's just get this over with. I'm ready to be home," Sammy said, though his voice suggested he was anything but ready. The two bodyguards shook their heads at the poor attitude still coming from Sammy, but they pushed it aside. They had bigger concerns than their client's personality. Connor took a deep breath, his finger hovering over the panic button. "On my mark," Connor said. He pressed the alarm button on the key fob. Instantly, an ear-splittingly loud car alarm pierced the night air. The horn honked repeatedly while the lights flashed in a chaotic pattern. The effect on the zombies was immediate and dramatic. Connor kept a silent countdown going in his head as he watched the ghouls peel away from the front entrance. They turned toward the noise like moths to a flame, stumbling over each other in their haste to reach the source. 1, 2, 3. He counted each second carefully, watching the crowd thin. Once he reached 10 seconds, most of the zombies had moved far enough away to give them a clear path. Connor leapt up from cover. "Let's move!" Connor commanded. Connor threw open the door's lock and pushed through into the parking lot. The night air hit them, cooler than the stuffy diner interior, and carrying the smell of death and smoke from distant fires. He glanced toward the bait car, confirming that the zombies were swarming it, pounding on the windows and hood as the alarm continued its wailing. The bodyguard turned sharply, running along the front of the diner toward the pickup truck, his boots slapped against the asphalt as he covered the distance quickly. As he got within a few car lengths of the truck, peripheral movement caught his eye. 2 zombies were running at him from the side of the building, having been out of sight until now. Without breaking stride, Connor raised his handgun and opened fire. He shot 6 times as he ran, not taking chances with his aim while moving. The bullets found their marks, dropping both creatures. But the gunfire had an unintended consequence. It drew the attention of the zombies by the bait car. "Get in the truck bed!" Connor shouted. He could see more movement coming from the far side of the building. At least 4 more zombies emerging from the shadows, cutting off any path to the passenger side door. He yanked open the driver's side door, jumping in as Tony and Sammy leapt into the truck bed, with surprising agility born of desperation. Connor's hands moved quickly, key in ignition, engine starting with a healthy roar. Through the mirrors, he could see zombies coming at them from all sides, converging like a closing net. He threw the transmission into reverse and hit the gas. The truck lurched backward violently. From the bed, Tony's voice carried over the engine noise. "Get us the hell out of here, man!" Tony shouted. Tony raised up slightly, firing into the crowd of zombies as they ran toward them. His shots were controlled, methodical, trying to thin the horde. Connor threw the truck into drive and floored it. The engine was more powerful than he'd expected, probably a V8 under the hood. The truck lurched forward with tremendous force, tires chirping on the asphalt. The sudden acceleration caught Tony off guard. He stumbled backward, his arms windmilling as he tried to regain balance. Sammy reached out for him, his fingers brushing Tony's jacket, but it was too late. Momentum carried Tony over the tailgate. Connor could only watch helplessly in the rearview mirror as his friend vanished from view. His foot went instinctively to the brake, and he threw the truck into park. His hand was already on the door handle when the scene in the mirror stopped him cold. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness behind them, Tony's gun firing rapidly, desperately. Each flash illuminated more zombies converging on his position. Far too many for one man to handle. Then came the screams, not of fear, but of pain. The kind of sound that meant only one thing. Connor's hand fell from the door handle. There was nothing he could do. Going back would only mean 3 deaths instead of 1. Behind him, Sammy was banging on the rear window, his panic overriding any concern for Tony. Connor reached over and unlocked the sliding window that connected the cab to the bed. "Get us the hell out of here!" Sammy screamed through the opening. Sammy scrambled through the window with desperate urgency, his expensive suit catching and tearing on the frame. He tumbled into the passenger seat gracelessly. Connor put the truck back into gear, his jaw clenched as he pulled out from the diner's parking lot. In the rearview mirror, he could see the zombie horde swarming over where Tony had fallen. His partner, his friend of 6 years, wasn't even visible under the mass of bodies. The screaming had stopped. Sammy began to open his mouth, probably to complain about something, but Connor cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell. "I don't care what you have to say. Just sit there and keep your mouth shut until I get you home," Connor said, his voice deadly quiet. For once, Sammy could tell when not to push. The bodyguard's expression made it clear that one more word might result in Sammy joining Tony in the parking lot. The high roller pressed himself against the passenger door and remained silent. The 2 men sat without speaking as Connor drove through the darkened streets, leaving the diner and their dead behind them. Chapter 7. Connor sped down the darkened streets of South Las Vegas, making the turn to the east that would carry them to the wealthy neighborhood that Sammy called home. The pickup truck's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating abandoned cars and debris scattered across the road. Every so often, he'd have to swerve around a body, some moving, some not. The drive had been silent since they left the diner. Connor didn't want to dwell on the loss of Tony, knowing there would be time to mourn once they were safely behind the walls of the development. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, jaw clenched as images of his friend falling from the truck bed kept replaying in his mind. 6 years they'd worked together. 6 years of having each other's backs through bar fights, difficult clients, and long, boring nights. Gone in seconds. The landscape gradually changed as they moved away from the commercial districts. Strip malls and gas stations gave way to larger lots with palm trees and decorative walls. Even in the midst of the apocalypse, the wealth disparity was obvious. These areas had virtually no signs of distress, as if money had somehow provided a buffer against the outbreak's initial wave. After what felt like an eternity of driving through the empty streets, Sammy finally spoke up, his voice cutting through the engine noise. "If you take this next left, it'll take you around to the main entrance," Sammy said, pointing ahead. "Thanks," Connor replied, his response clipped and cold. Connor was short with his passenger, his rage bubbling just underneath the surface. Every time he looked at Sammy, he saw Tony reaching out, trying to grab hold before falling. Despite sensing the bodyguard's anger, Sammy decided to try his luck and speak again. "I'm sorry about your friend back there. I tried to," Sammy began, attempting to sound sympathetic. Connor spoke up forcefully, cutting Sammy off mid-sentence. "Just save it. I know it was my fault. I should have eased on the gas instead of gunning it. And that's something I'm going to have to live with. But if you want to get home in one piece, I need to focus," Connor said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. Sammy was offended by Connor's tone, being cut off and not allowed to share his sympathies. His face flushed with indignation, but for once he kept his mouth shut. Rather than throw it back in the bodyguard's face and make a stink about it, he kept quiet, understanding that he still needed Connor's help to reach safety. Connor was forced to slam on the brakes suddenly, the tires squealing in protest. 100 yards ahead, he spotted a line of traffic completely blocking the road. Cars were packed bumper to bumper, and zombies ran between the vehicles, their silhouettes visible in the headlights as they pounded on windows and hoods. On the left side of the intersection, Connor could make out an elevated fence, stone and iron rising at least 10 feet high. "Is that the front gate on the left there?" Connor asked, studying the situation. "Yeah, it is," Sammy confirmed, leaning forward to get a better look. The gate itself was massive, dual iron barriers set into stone pillars that looked more like a medieval fortress than a residential entrance. A guard shack sat dark beside it, and the entrance was completely blocked by the mass of vehicles. "How in the hell are we supposed to get through that?" Connor asked, frustration evident in his voice. "Let me make a call and I'll find out," Sammy said, already pulling out his cell phone. Sammy dialed a number from memory, the phone's screen casting blue light on his face. The device rang twice before being answered, and Connor could hear both sides of the conversation in the quiet cab. "Mr. Torrino, it's good to hear from you." "Are you safe?" Mr. Landry's voice came through, professional but carrying relief. "Anything but Landry. My bodyguard and I are on the side road leading to the front gate. What's going on up there?" Sammy demanded. "We've had some troubles over the last few hours. Some violent attacks inside the community. Apparently they're happening outside of it as well," Mr. Landry explained, his voice carefully controlled. "Yeah, no shit, Landry. What's going on at the gate?" Sammy snapped impatiently. "Oh, sorry, sir. When the attacks happened, we went on full lockdown. About an hour after that, people started showing up. Most of them are off-site employees wanting to come in for shelter," Mr. Landry reported. "And you didn't let them in?" Sammy asked, though his tone suggested approval rather than criticism. "No, sir, I did not. With the violence that was taking place, I didn't want to add more people to that equation," Mr. Landry confirmed. "You did the right thing, Landry. But look, we need a way into the community. Can you clear the front gate?" Sammy asked. There was a pause before Landry responded, and Connor could hear shouting in the background of the call. "Not without civilian casualties and risking a riot," Mr. Landry replied grimly. "So, how do you propose getting me inside?" Sammy pressed, his voice rising with anxiety. "You said that you're on the side road, correct?" Mr. Landry asked. "Yeah, Landry, right here on the side road. If I threw a rock, I could hit the gate," Sammy said with exasperation. "Can you put me on speaker so your bodyguard can hear?" Mr. Landry requested. "Yeah, fine," Sammy said, pulling the phone from his ear and pressing the speaker button. The phone's speaker crackled slightly as it switched modes, filling the truck cab with Landry's voice. "All right, say what you gotta say, Landry," Sammy said, holding the phone between them. "I'm Landry, head of security for the community." Mr. Landry introduced himself formally. "I'm Connor, currently the head of security inside this pickup truck," Connor replied. Landry let out half a chuckle before stifling it, trying to remain professional despite the absurdity of the situation. "About 2 miles back the way you came, on the lakeside, there's going to be a turnoff. Half a mile down from there will be the docks. Do you think you can make it back to them?" Mr. Landry asked. Connor mentally retraced their route, remembering what they'd passed. "That shouldn't be a problem," Connor confirmed. "Good. I've had spotters watching the docks for the last few hours, and there are boats still there. However," Mr. Landry began, then trailed off ominously. Connor understood immediately what the hesitation meant. "Let me guess, a lot of angry company?" Connor said. "Yes, a lot of angry company," Mr. Landry confirmed. "How many are we talking?" Connor asked. "We haven't been keeping exact count, but in the neighborhood of 6 to 8, Mr. Landry reported. "Are you kidding me, Landry? You want me to run past more of those things? Just get a ladder and put it over the fence." Sammy exploded, his fear overcoming his composure. "We thought about that, sir, however," Mr. Landry began, trailing off again. Connor understood the problem and finished the thought. "If just one of those people by the front gate saw us, they'd lead those things right to us," Connor said. "All right, fine, we'll go to the docks. You just make sure to greet us on the docks when we get across," Sammy said, resignation in his voice. "I'll be there personally, sir." "Good luck," Mr. Landry assured him. "We'll see you in a few, Landry," Connor said, already shifting the truck into reverse. Sammy clicked his phone off, pocketing it as Connor began doing a 3-point turn on the road. After a minute of driving back the way they'd come, they reached the turnoff Landry had described. Connor made the turn and cut the headlights, switching to parking lights only. The moon was bright enough to see the road, and he didn't want to advertise their approach to whatever was waiting at the docks. He kept their speed low, the engine barely above idle, trying to minimize noise. The road here was tree-lined, branches creating shadows that danced in the dim light. Through gaps in the trees, Connor could catch glimpses of moonlight reflecting off water. Lake Las Vegas, the man-made centerpiece of the exclusive community. When they got the docks within view, a collection of wooden piers extending into the dark water, Connor pulled off to the side of the road and cut the engine. The sudden silence was almost overwhelming after the constant engine noise. "What are you doing?" "We're still 50 yards from the docks?" Sammy asked, panic creeping into his voice. "And we're going to be moving up to them quietly. I don't want those people to know we're there until we're already on the boat," Connor explained, checking his weapon in the dim light. Sammy thought for a moment, his hands visibly shaking before nodding in agreement. "Fine, just get me there," Sammy said, his voice barely above a whisper. Connor checked his handgun, ejecting the partially spent magazine and inserting a fresh one. 13 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. He had 1 more full magazine after this. Not much if things went sideways. He gave Sammy a pat on the chest, the gesture making the high roller flinch. "Let's go," Connor said, opening his door slowly to minimize noise. They exited the truck, Connor closing his door with a soft click rather than letting it slam. Sammy followed his lead, though his movements were clumsier, nervous energy making him awkward. The two of them stayed on the gravel shoulder of the road as they approached the docks, their footsteps crunching softly on the loose stones. From ahead came the sounds they'd been dreading, moaning and shuffling feet. The zombies were active, but hadn't detected them yet. They got within 10 yards of the parking lot, taking a knee behind a roadside sign that read, "Lake Las Vegas Marina, Public Boat Launch," in elegant script. Connor peered over the top of the sign, scanning the area in the moonlight. The parking lot had a few abandoned cars with doors hanging open. He spotted movement near the docks, zombies wandering aimlessly, maybe 7 or 8, like Landry had said. One creature stood alone, separated from the pack by about 20 feet. It had been a marina worker, still wearing a polo shirt with the lake's logo. Connor began clicking his tongue softly, the sound just loud enough to carry to the lone zombie without alerting the others. After a few attempts, the ghoul's head snapped toward them, and it immediately broke into that terrifying sprint. Connor stayed calm and out of sight as the creature approached. He counted down the distance in his head. 10 yards, 5, 3. As it got close, the bodyguard pounced, darting up from cover and grabbing the zombie by the arm. Using its own momentum against it, he yanked it face first to the ground with a heavy thud. The ghoul face-planted hard on the gravel, stunning it momentarily. Connor raised his handgun and brought the butt down repeatedly on the back of its skull. 3 strikes, 4, 5, until he felt the bone give way and the creature stopped moving. As it fell truly lifeless, he looked back over the sign, relieved to see none of the other zombies had noticed the brief scuffle. "Come on, stay on my hip." "If I start firing, run to a boat and get in," Connor whispered. Sammy nodded, his face pale in the moonlight, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool night air. Connor rose from behind the sign, his handgun at the ready as they moved toward the water. The duo moved quickly but quietly toward the docks, cutting to the right toward the water as soon as they were on marina property. They took cover behind a wooden wall that served as a visual barrier marking the edge of the parking area from the boat launch. The weathered planks provided concealment while Connor assessed their next move. The closest suitable boat was 30 yards up, moored at the end of a dock that extended 10 yards into the water. It wasn't huge, basically a glorified canoe with a small outboard motor, but it would work for crossing the lake. The moonlight reflected off the calm water, making their destination clearly visible. Zombies were scattered around the dock area, most wandering near the parking lot, but one stood directly on the dock they needed to use. It swayed slightly, as if the gentle motion of the floating dock affected its balance. Connor whispered his plan, keeping his voice barely audible. "I'm going to take out the one on the dock, then cover you while you undo the rope. Call out when it's free," Connor instructed. Sammy nodded, giving the bodyguard a shaky thumbs up. His whole body was trembling now, adrenaline and fear coursing through him. Connor turned and began moving, staying low while keeping his gun aimed at the zombies further down the property. As he reached the edge of the dock, his footstep on the wooden planks created a hollow sound that echoed across the water. The nearest creature's head snapped toward the noise, and it began running immediately. Connor broke into a sprint, meeting the creature's charge head-on. He lowered his shoulder as they closed the distance, hitting the ghoul square in the chest with enough force to lift it off its feet. The zombie flew backward off the dock, splashing into the dark water with a tremendous crash. The sound was like a dinner bell. The other zombies in the area let out excited moans, all turning toward the disturbance and beginning their inhuman sprints. "Get to the boat!" Connor shouted. Connor opened fire, squeezing off 3 rounds in quick succession. The first shot missed, the second caught a zombie in the shoulder, spinning it around, but the third found its mark, dropping the creature. Sammy ran down the dock behind him, his expensive shoes slipping on the wet planks. The bodyguard continued firing as he backed up, his training taking over. Breathe, aim, squeeze. Another zombie dropped, then another, but more kept coming, and his ammunition was limited. It only took Sammy a few seconds to undo the mooring rope with fumbling fingers, pushing the small boat out into the water with desperate strength. "Connor, we're free!" Sammy called out. Connor fired off 2 more shots, dropping another zombie, before turning and sprinting down the dock. He could see that Sammy had already pushed off and was drifting away from the dock, the gap widening with each second. The bodyguard pumped his legs hard, covering the distance in long strides. At the edge of the dock, he pushed off with everything he could muster, launching himself through the air. Connor splashed down into the water, the cold temperature shocking his system. The lake was deeper than expected, and his boots and clothes became heavy, dragging him down. He swam the last few yards to the boat with powerful strokes, Sammy leaning over to help pull him in. The high roller grabbed Connor's jacket with both hands, hauling with surprising strength born of desperation. The 2 of them looked back at the docks as Connor caught his breath. A couple of the zombies had been pushed into the water by their companions running into them from behind. They thrashed in the water briefly before sinking, their lack of coordination making swimming impossible. Despite being fast on land, the water was their enemy. "That's some nice work, Connor," Sammy said, genuine appreciation in his voice for the first time all night. "Thanks, Sammy," Connor replied, water dripping from his clothes. Connor sat up in the small boat, looking at the long stretch of water between them and the lights of the neighborhood on the far shore. Maybe 300 yards, an easy row on a calm night. He grabbed an oar from the bottom of the boat, positioning himself in the rear. "All right, Sammy, let's get you home." Chapter 8. It took Connor a good 20 minutes to paddle the duo across the lake, his muscles burning from exertion. His wet clothes clung to him, making every movement more difficult, and the small boat wasn't designed for speed. The oars were old, one slightly warped, forcing him to compensate with each stroke to keep them moving in a straight line. Despite the pain in his shoulders and back, he could see several figures awaiting them ahead on the far shore, waving them toward a well-lit dock. The lights of Lake Las Vegas's exclusive homes reflected off the water, creating an almost surreal contrast to the chaos they had left behind. As they got closer, Connor could make out 3 men, all armed, all watching their approach intently. Sammy got up as they neared the dock, nearly capsizing the small boat with his sudden movement. He grabbed the mooring rope from the bottom of the boat and threw it over to the man closest to the water's edge. The man was tall, early 30s, with the build of someone who spent serious time in the gym. He looked like he could take on a horde of zombies by himself, broad shoulders, thick arms, and a stance that suggested military or law enforcement background. "It's good to see you again, Mr. Torrino," Mr. Landry said, catching the rope expertly. "You too, Landry. Now get us over there," Sammy replied, his commanding tone returning now that he was back in familiar territory. "Yes, sir," Mr. Landry responded automatically. Landry pulled them into the dock with strong, steady pulls, the boat gliding the final few feet. He helped both men up onto the wooden planks, Sammy first, then Connor. The bodyguards' waterlogged clothes dripped steadily onto the dock, creating dark puddles that reflected the security lights. Landry nodded in acknowledgement to Connor, professional recognition between 2 men in the protection business. "Have any trouble at the docks?" Mr. Landry asked, his tone conversational, but his eyes alert. "I could have done without the swim, but other than that, it was a cakewalk compared to the rest of the evening," Connor replied, wringing water from his jacket. "Enough chit-chat. We can talk on the drive home," Sammy interrupted, his impatience evident. "Of course, sir. I have a golf cart waiting for you on the road," Mr. Landry said smoothly. Sammy walked past the other 2 security guards without acknowledging them. Both were armed with assault rifles, military-grade weapons that seemed excessive for a gated community, though perhaps not anymore. The sight put Connor into a state of unease. These weren't rental cops with pistols. These were serious operators with serious firepower. As he passed, Sammy leaned in close to the guards, saying something that only they could hear. Connor caught the guards exchanging glances before Sammy motioned for them to follow. Whatever he'd said, it had made them uncomfortable. "Everybody into the cart, I'm ready to be home," Sammy declared. Landry got behind the wheel of the golf cart, a luxury model with leather seats and an extended roof. Connor slipped into the back, sliding to the middle of the bench seat to allow room for the 2 armed guards. They sat on either side of him, their rifles held casually, but ready. The message was clear. He was their prisoner, not their guest. As they started driving through the community's pristine streets, Connor looked around at the houses with amazement. While he had been to some nice places during his time as a bodyguard, penthouses, private estates, luxury resorts, he hadn't quite seen this level of concentrated wealth. These weren't just expensive homes, they were monuments to excess. Massive mansions lined the waterfront, each one unique but all sharing the same aura of unlimited budgets. Mediterranean villas sat next to modern glass structures, French chateaus beside southwestern adobe palaces. The landscaping alone must have cost millions. Palm trees imported from overseas, gardens maintained to perfection even now. He spotted one house on the waterfront that had a boathouse larger than most people's primary homes, complete with what looked like living quarters above the boat slips. As they drove through the eerily quiet streets, the illusion of normalcy was shattered by a gunshot echoing from a couple blocks away. Sammy flinched violently at the sound, his head whipping around to look for the source. "What in the hell was that, Landry?" Sammy demanded. "Well, sir, we've had some violence in the community, and we've had to deal with it without restraint," Mr. Landry explained calmly. Connor understood what that meant. The infection was already inside the gates. "Let me guess, people biting other people?" Connor asked. "Yes, sir, and lots of it. After the first few reports, we locked the community down and started doing house-by-house searches. If people don't respond to commands, we put them down," Mr. Landry confirmed, his tone matter of fact. What about the injured? Connor pressed. We have an on-site medical facility, Mr. Landry began, then paused before continuing. At last count, there's a dozen people there with bite injuries. Sammy's eyes went wide at the mention of bite victims, his face flushing with agitation. You radio them right now and tell them if someone is bitten to put a bullet in their brains, Sammy shouted. Landry and the other security guards were visibly shocked at the order. Even in their current situation, the idea of executing injured residents was a line they hadn't crossed yet. What are you talking about, sir? These are residents with injuries, Mr. Landry said carefully. Connor, tell them, Sammy commanded, pointing at the bodyguard. Landry glanced in the rearview mirror to get a look at Connor, who met his gaze steadily. After a moment, Connor gave a small nod of his head. He's right. Well, mostly right. If they're bitten, they need to be locked up and secure, Connor said. You know good goddamn well that they turn into those crazies, Sammy exploded. Landry again looked to Connor for confirmation, clearly viewing him as a more reliable source than the panicking Sammy. Connor nodded again. It does seem to be the way this is spreading so fast, Connor admitted. Bullshit, Connor. You saw Knox turn just like I did, Sammy pressed. Connor nodded slightly, conceding the point while trying to maintain some humanity in the discussion. Yeah, but that was after he bled out. We don't know what happens if it's just a bite, Connor said, though even as he forced the words out, he knew the bites were most likely fatal. He'd seen enough tonight to know the pattern. Landry pulled out his radio, clicking it on. The device crackled to life with static. Medbay, do you copy? Mr. Landry called. Yes, Mr. Landry, a woman's voice responded. Once the bitten patients are patched up, I want you to take them over to holding, Mr. Landry ordered. There was a pause before the confused response came through. Sir? You want me to lock them up in the cells? Yes, I do. Keep them there until I get over to you, Mr. Landry confirmed. Yes, sir, the voice replied, though the reluctance was evident. Landry looked over to Sammy, who shook his head in disgust at what he saw as half measures. When I give you an order, I expect you to follow it, Landry, Sammy said coldly. Yes, sir. If they show even the smallest sign of being violent, I'll put them down myself, Mr. Landry replied. Sammy mumbled under his breath, cursing about incompetence and insubordination as Landry drove them through the community. They turned onto a cul-de-sac where the homes were even more impressive than what they'd passed. Finally, they pulled up to Sammy's house. While it wasn't the largest in the community, that honor belonged to a pseudo-castle they had passed earlier, it was immaculate. The Mediterranean-style villa sat on what had to be at least an acre of manicured grounds. The yard was perfectly maintained with not a blade of grass out of place, every inch of the structure looking like it had the day it was finished. Landscape lighting illuminated the home's facade, highlighting architectural details that screamed money. Okay, come on, everybody inside, Sammy ordered. The group followed Sammy through the grand entrance, Connor noting the security keypad, and reinforced the door frame. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, artwork that probably cost more than Connor made in a year. The security guards took positions by the door, while Connor and Landry walked further into the foyer. Sammy walked over to a large bar built into the right side of the entryway, an elaborate setup with hundreds of bottles displayed on glass shelves. He went behind it and poured himself a large drink. Scotch by the look of it. Probably the same expensive stuff he'd been drinking in the limo. He downed half of it in one gulp before continuing to talk. Oh, that's so much better, Sammy said, the alcohol already working to steady his nerves. Sammy walked out from behind the bar, tumbler still in hand, and stood in front of Connor. His smarmy attitude was beginning to show through again, the fear replaced by his usual arrogance now that he was safe in his domain. So what do you think of my digs, bodyguard? Sammy asked, gesturing around the opulent space. Connor looked around, taking in the excessive display of wealth. Crystal chandeliers, original paintings, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. It's mighty impressive, Sammy. You've done all right for yourself, Connor said neutrally. I'd like to think so, Sammy replied with false modesty. Well, as you know, it's been a hell of a night. If you'll point me to where I'm staying, I'll get out of your way and let you get settled in, Connor said. Sammy got a devious grin on his face, the expression of someone about to reveal they've been holding all the cards. He snapped his fingers loudly, The audible cue caused the two security guards to raise their rifles, pointing them directly at Connor. The bodyguard slowly raised his hands, understanding immediately that he'd been played. "Well, bodyguard, you're going to be staying the night at the bottom of the lake," Sammy said with satisfaction. "And here I was thinking a businessman would honor his deals," Connor replied, keeping his voice steady despite the guns pointed at him. "Did you really think I was going to let a low-rent man like yourself stay in my neighborhood? No, never going to happen, especially after the way you've treated me this evening," Sammy said, his voice dripping with contempt. "3 of my friends sacrificed their lives to get you here," Connor reminded him, anger creeping into his voice. "I don't care. You are a low-class, rude little prick, and I don't let anybody talk to me the way you talk to me tonight," Sammy spat. Connor stared down the smug little man, keeping his hands raised as Landry stepped forward reluctantly. The security chief reached out and relieved Connor of his handgun. Landry's expression was unreadable as he tucked the gun into his belt. "Landry, take this prick down to the water and put him in the drink. Then go take care of those people at the med bay. If I don't hear shots going off in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to send someone to start shooting at you," Sammy ordered. "Yes, sir, Mr. Torrino," Mr. Landry replied professionally. Landry grabbed onto Connor's arm, his grip gentle but firm, pulling him along toward the door. "I'll be seeing you, Sammy," Connor said, his tone making it clear this was a promise, not a farewell. "Not in this lifetime," Sammy replied smugly, already turning back to his bar. Connor continued staring Sammy down as he was led out of the house. The night air was cool against his still damp clothes. Landry looked over to the other 2 guards who were following them to the golf cart. Just before reaching it, he stopped and gave them orders. "You 2, go to the med bay and prepare the people for transport," Mr. Landry commanded. "Sir," Mr. Torrino said. One guard began. "I know what he said. Your only concern is what I'm saying." Mr. Landry cut him off, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. The 2 guards could hear the force in Landry's voice, the tone of someone not to be crossed. They exchanged glances, nodded, and started jogging in the opposite direction toward the medical facility. Once they were out of sight, Landry's demeanor shifted slightly. He motioned for Connor to get into the cart. "Come on, we need to get you to the docks," Mr. Landry said, though something in his tone had changed. Connor didn't fight it, getting into the passenger seat as Landry began driving them back toward the water. The duo rode in silence, but the tension between them was different now, less adversarial, more contemplative. Landry pulled up to the same dock where they had arrived, looking around carefully to make sure it was just the 2 of them. He motioned for Connor to get out, and they walked together to the edge of the dock. Finally, Landry spoke up. "Where do you live?" Mr. Landry asked. "North side of town," Connor replied, confused by the question. Mr. Landry thought for a moment, clearly making a decision. 615 Wintergreen Drive, apartment 3C, Mr. Landry said. Connor looked at Landry in confusion. Before he could ask what was happening, Landry tossed him a set of keys. Connor caught them reflexively. "Repeat what I just said to you," Mr. Landry instructed. 615 Wintergreen Drive, apartment 3C, Connor repeated, understanding beginning to dawn. "Good. It's just a few miles from here. Those keys will get you inside. I went shopping over the weekend, so there should be enough food in the place to get you through a week or so. Help yourself to the bar, which should get you through the month," Mr. Landry explained. "Not that I'm complaining, but I'm not sure this is what Sammy had in mind when he said, 'Put me into the drink,'" Connor said carefully. Mr. Landry's expression hardened slightly. "Sammy pays well, but not that well. I don't mind putting down people who are a threat, but I'm not putting down good men because they dared to talk back to that little prick," Mr. Landry said with conviction. Connor nodded his appreciation, understanding the risk Landry was taking. He turned and began walking toward the boat. Before he reached it, Landry let out a whistle. Connor turned back. "Here, you might need this," Mr. Landry said. Landry pulled out Connor's handgun, tossing it over to him. Connor caught it, checking the magazine before tucking it into his waistband. "Good luck out there," Mr. Landry said. Connor nodded, getting into the boat and pushing off from the dock. He began rowing back across the lake, his muscles protesting the renewed effort. Behind him, he watched as Landry pulled out his own handgun, firing it once into the air. The shot echoed across the water. Theater for Sammy's benefit, in case the paranoid businessman was listening. Connor rowed steadily until he reached the middle of the lake, then stopped. He sat there for a moment, looking between the two shores. "Enjoy your comfortable lifestyle while you can, Sammy, because you haven't seen the last of me." The end.